Greetings, everyone. The following presentation is a summative explanation of what our Taft College OFAR team executed during the spring semester of 2024. Our team was made up of the following individuals: Darcy Bogle, counselor and professor of psychology; Michelle Beasley, professor of early childhood development; Michelle Oya, professor of psychology; Kelly Colgena-Reyes, professor of English and Spanish; and myself, Salvador Jimenez Murguia. I teach sociology and ethnic studies. Before we begin, I'd like to share a bit about our community. We work at Taft College in the city of Taft, California, a city of just over 9,000 people located about 35 miles west of Bakersfield, California, in Kern County. The college itself employs nearly 120 faculty members with a pretty even split between full-time and contingent faculty, teaching some 5,700 students. Now for a little history about the city of Taft, which I feel is important to the overall interest, participation, and experience in the OFAR program. Like all places, Taft definitely has a history, and one that's not necessarily a history that many would like to speak about, much less incorporate into the overall branding that our college prides itself in. Formerly referred to as Moron, Taft was renamed in honor of President William H. Taft, yes, that Taft, the once governor of the Philippines during the U.S. colonial occupations of its islands. That same Taft that referred to Filipinos as Americans' quote-unquote little brown brothers, and that same Taft that told President William McKinley that Americans would need, quote, 50 or 100 years of close supervision to develop anything resembling Anglo-Saxon political principles and skills, end quote. Taft, a place where our Filipino students take these very classes in the Anglo-Saxon political principles and skills, among other things, to which that President, Taft, was referring. In brief, and as it relates to race, racism, and anti-racism, Taft was also a sundown town. For those that aren't familiar with the term sundown town, this refers to towns that were made up of nearly all white residents and practiced explicit forms of racial discrimination through intimidation, violence, and physical isolation. One of the notable characteristics of these sundown towns was their actual signage that displayed racist sentiments about their intolerance for non-white individuals. According to Michael Eisinger, a Fresno historian that's researched the Central Valley extensively, the sign that demarcated the city limits upon entering Taft read, quote, "Nigger, don't let the sun set on you here," end quote. As the enterprise of revisionism often does, the history, like the sign, is now just a sign, void of its signifier and signified. But the sentiment remained. This sentiment of racism, both symbolic and otherwise, was marbled into the community, and although there's no shortage of instances that substantiate its presence, one incident in particular still haunts Taft, especially Taft College. That incident was the way it once lost its entire black population in a matter of one day. As documented in the June 1975 issue of Sports Illustrated, on 25 May 1975, several carloads of whites attacked 3 black members of the football team while walking through campus. One of the armed white attackers, who was later charged with attempted murder, was shot. Although the initial fight was broken up, at least a dozen white locals waited outside the apartment when the students attempted to make their way to the campus. Another fight ensued, and by early evening, 60 whites stormed the dormitory with chants of, quote, "Kill the niggers," end quote. Local police eventually freed the trapped black students and transported them to Bakersfield, escorting the entire 1975 population of African American students, 13 of them, out of Taft indefinitely. The reason why this historical information is so relevant today, and certainly relevant to this OFAR presentation, is precisely that our team works, engaging in labor pursuant to our species' beings, in a place that still fosters, however so subtle, a tradition so admittedly resistant to change. There's too much detail to cover here, but just know that our efforts, and the efforts of a handful of some of our other colleagues, make up a group that actively pushes for a paradigm shift. As a survey of our OFAR work, Professor Bogle took an equity-minded approach to transforming her course content by decolonizing her syllabus, adding community-building items, incorporating culturally responsive teaching, and standards-based grading. Professor Beasley mixed it up with her early care, education, and family studies course by introducing a new OER textbook that better addresses the diverse concerns of her students. She didn't do this unilaterally, however, as she solicited the input of the students themselves, having them compare and contrast this new text with the original one that's often used in this class. In this way, her efforts drew upon the principles of collectivity and communal-based resources. She and her students settled on a new text, an OER text that better incorporates anti-racism, diversity, and inclusion. Above all, she was able to prioritize voice, in particular the voices of her students, which is often lost in the traditional model of teaching for the sake of simply teaching, regardless of whether anything is ever taught or anyone ever learns. Perhaps taking some cues from cutting-edge research on subtraction by Leidy Koltz, Professor Oya pulled back from immediate implementation of her interest in teaching qualitative research methods and gave both herself and her students some time to think about how this type of research could be taught as well as learned most effectively. Professor Oya completed outside training in intersectional qualitative analysis and pieced together readings that focused on both indigenous ways of knowing and decolonizing research traditions. With this content in mind, she was able to establish an accompanying lab for future courses. Additionally, her commitment to open pedagogy allowed her to set up long-term goals in dialogue with this training and research. Professor Koltz-Reyes assembled a 4-part plan that reached into just about every part of the teaching and learning experience. She put in the time creating a liquid syllabus, complete with a mini video and an introduction letter to her students. Next, in an effort to decolonize her syllabus, she rewrote its academic integrity section in a thoughtful and student-centered fashion. She also incorporated some of Joe Feldman's work on grading through an equity-minded lens, with the overall goal of reducing bias in the evaluation process. And finally, Koltz-Reyes did some curriculum revisions, adding important literary works associated with racial awareness. Lastly, there was me. My work was multifaceted, and given that my 2 areas of teaching at Taft, both sociology and ethnic studies, lend themselves to this anti-racism work, I applied as much relevant content to all of my face-to-face courses. I focused on empowerment and providing resources, options, and tools to navigate colonized spaces. Everything from filing official complaints about professors and police officers to managing time, budgets, and demeanor in spaces that situate us in a state of double consciousness. I also removed rote-oriented testing and replaced it with public sociology and public ethnic studies activities, like making T-shirts that initiate discussion for ethnography and activism, as well as surveying our peers for posts on our walls about everything from microaggressions and feelings of discomfort as students of color in courses geared toward teaching the privileged. We also decolonized our classroom, both physically and philosophically, to provide perspective on what learning without domination and power imbalances might look like. I also had my students write letters to the next cohort, documenting their experience, encouraging the next generation of learners, and overall creating a record that they were indeed actually there in a space that wasn't intended for them, but due to the efforts of their ancestors and movements of change, opened up the gates, doors, and windows for them to partake. On behalf of Taft College OFAR team, that was definitely that.
Not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised.